You know, sometimes the best defense is a good offense. And to stop fracking or nuclear power or coal and to get clean, green energy sources, we've got to take the power from the vested interests that impose this upon us, not because it's ecologically rational, because they make money off it. I'm talking about big energy corporations. We know that the people behind the fracking are investors from all over the world, from Europe to China, the biggest energy corporations, people down in Texas, you know, or people on Wall Street are licking their chops. Listen to Mad Money, Jim Cramer, you know, that crazy guy. Man, he wants to frack and make some money. And he speaks for a lot of very rich, powerful people. And then you've got the IOUs, we call them, the investor-owned utilities. They don't care what we burn, as long as we're burning our money to buy what they're selling. And that's the electricity and the gas. And then behind them are the generators. And for them, the more we consume, the more money they make. So they have no interest in efficiency. So I want to talk about public power systems as a way, one tool in our toolkit to get to a clean energy system and stop fracking. And the title, I don't know if we're working with this one now, but I think was put on there was, you know, why Philly said no, or something, how they said no, why they could choose. Philadelphia has a public gas company called Philadelphia Gas Works. It's a city-owned gas utility. And on January 18th of this year, the Gas Commission, which governs the gas utility, is appointed by the City Council and the Mayor, approved a City Council report saying that they should not buy any gas produced out of the Marcellus Shale by hydrofracking until it could be proven safe, which means forever. And that followed on a resolution by the City Council in March 2010 where they said they supported a moratorium on hydrofracking until the EPA did their report in 2012. So you can see it went from City Council resolution, then they used their utility. So they have some power because they own their own gas company. So the central point is public power systems give us the democratic power to choose, whether it's no gas from fracking or on the positive side, because we got better alternatives than natural gas, to build clean, renewable power systems for gas and electricity. Democracy's no guarantee. I mean, we can talk about some of the public power systems that have invested in nuclear power, and also how some of those systems, and I will talk about that, got out of it. But at least we got a fighting chance with a democratic system. So what is public power? It's basically the government owns the utility. Usually it's local government. It can be a municipality. In New York, they're villages like Skaneateles, Solvay, they're all over the state. There are 53 systems in the state. There are over 2,000 in the United States. Sometimes they're utility districts that are just carved out as a particular municipal government. Sometimes they're county. You got TVA. We have New York Power Authority, which has certain larger structures, but not the distribution of gas and electricity. And these 2,000 systems are basically a legacy of the fight of populists and socialists when gas and electricity were being set up as natural monopolies in cities. And there was a fight. So Cleveland got a public system. LA got a public system. Syracuse didn't. But Syracuse reserved the right to take it over anytime it wanted. Our mayor doesn't even know that because their mind is too close to the whole idea. But we've looked up the franchise from 1887. So that's a fight that has gone on for a long time. Now let me just talk a little bit about public power's record. Today, on average, is 13% cheaper than IOUs, investor-owned utilities. And it traditionally was in the 20 to 30% range. What has really skewed that is the huge bailout of Long Island Lighting Company to set up the Long Island Power Authority, because the criminals who built the Shoreham nuke ran it for one day, irradiated it, so it couldn't even be used for scrap metal, and we had to bail them out. We didn't have to bail them out. Mario Cuomo cut a deal to bail out the investors. And that has skewed the averages. So in other parts of the state, like Solvay, which is right next to Syracuse, it's a village adjacent to Syracuse, it's a blue-collar suburb, inner ring suburb, they pay 1/4 to 1/3 what we pay for electricity in Syracuse, right next door, just over, you cross the street and it jumps down to 1/3. And that's because they have access to hydroelectric from the New York Power Authority. Public power systems have that. Some of that goes to the IOUs, and some of it goes to private companies through this Jobs for Power, which they just revamped under another name this week. So it's cheaper. Why? Not for profit. You don't have to pay stockholders. You just got to pay interest on bonds. The bonds are tax exempt because it's municipal or government. The executives make civil service salaries, not these outrageous private company, executive salaries that they make as much in a year as we make in a lifetime. And that includes, national greed, as we call it in Syracuse. I don't know what you call it. That's probably a lot of you, national grid. Yeah. People just say, I got my greed bill today. And everybody knows what you're talking about. There's no income tax to pay because it's a nonprofit municipal corporation, but it does pay payment in lieu of taxes on average across the country, 14% more to local government in those payments than the IOUs pay in property and franchise taxes. So it doesn't undermine your local government. So it's cheaper. The service is better. I mean, the record on that is clear. Going to National Grid again, they got fined a couple years ago for not maintaining their distribution and transmission systems, and then were instructed by the public service company, which, we call it the private service company because they really don't listen to the consumers, but in this case it was so bad that they required National Grid to invest $2 billion into its infrastructure. Local crews have been cut down. This was NIMO before, Niagara-Mohawk before National Grid. I guess some of you are in other utility districts. This is my direct experience, but I think it goes across all the private utilities in the state. They've been cutting down on crews. I know from IBEW workers who are the linemen, they prefer, the union prefers to deal with municipals because, public power companies, because they give them a fair deal and they have an interest in maintaining high levels of service. If you remember that ice storm up in the North Country, I think it was the late 90s, there were people without power in the middle of winter for 6 weeks. And, whereas if you have a municipal crew, it's local, and whereas the big utilities, they try to reduce and then they run them around all over the country. People here are going down to Texas sometimes after storms like we've had this week. So the service is better. And then customer service. You don't get that impossible maze of dial, you got 8 options, you get there, you got 8 more options, you're on there for an hour and then you finally get to where you're at and then you got to wait 20 minutes. Most of the public powers people, they got a desk, they got a phone, there's a real person at the end. When I wanted to get John Montone, who runs the electric department of the Village of Solvay, to come over to Syracuse, we're doing a teach-in in a month, I call up the number, and the secretary says, hello, and I say, may I speak to John Montone? She says, who's speaking? Howie Hawkins. Hold on just a second, I'll see if he's in. And I get to talk to him. It's a real person. He runs the whole electric system in the village. You get real service, and the thing is, we get real service because we control it, because we get to elect either the city council, which runs it as a department, or you can run it as an independent authority and have an independent board elected by the people like a school board, which for a city like Syracuse, which is about to get taken over by the banks, a control board situation like Buffalo's in because of the fiscal situation, we can finance public power because it'll be independent authority and won't be up against the constitutional limit that the Syracuse are already up against in its finances. I don't know if your villages are as broke, or your towns or your cities are as broke as Syracuse, but that's an option you can do with an independent authority. And then, I think from our point of view, the thing you can do with public power is go green. Efficiency and renewables pay off because you're operating at cost. You want to reduce your costs, so the least cost options are the incentives are built into a public power system to do that. So when you invest in efficiency, when the utility takes some of its revenues and helps people weatherize their homes, put solar collectors on the rooftops, retrofit them with ground source heat pumps, put wind generators up, and all those things, that's generation capacity for the community, and it's also efficiency. It all pays off, and they have no vested interest in maintaining the growing volume or consumption of electricity and gas that the investor-owned utilities and the big energy companies do. An example is the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, SMUD. They decided, the people, yeah, that's what they call it, SMUD, S-M-U-D. And they decided that the Rancho Seco nuke was costing more than they anticipated, and it was, spewing radiation and creating a growing liability of nuclear waste. And so they voted in the early 80s to shut it down and convert to renewables and efficiency. And they did it, and it's been financially viable, and they just decided to decommission this plant, 20, 30 years before while it was still licensed to operate. And that's because the people decided nuclear was a bad choice, and they decided not to do that. Another example, this is a co-op that got invested in the Seabrook nuclear power plant in New Hampshire in the rural part. The rural co-ops were set up by Roosevelt administration because the investor-owned utilities didn't want to string line through all these farmhouses. It was more capital invested for the money you could make, so they just ignored the rural areas. So the rural areas, a lot of them are set up as co-ops, and the co-op got conned into, investing in Seabrook, and then the membership had to take control of their co-op. I mean, they had been so complacent getting good service for so long that a little clique of engineers had basically taken it over. They had to fight to do it, but because they had the rights in their bylaws, they were able to do it and get out of that investment in Seabrook. So, let me just talk a little bit about the movement for public power in New York. Probably the most, if you followed this at all, you know about Messina in the 80s. They had a big fight with Niagara Mohawk. They finally succeeded. They had to spend 8 years in court. It was a big fight. But now they've saved hundreds of millions of dollars, plus industry up there. It was aluminum, which is high electricity, stayed. And so they were able to keep their manufacturing base. In Syracuse, I ran for mayor and raised this issue. And I've been raising it for years, but that year we got a real rate shock, and people grabbed onto that issue to the point where the Democrat and Republican were saying, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. They didn't really mean it, but that's what they were saying. We got the city council, after a 2-year struggle, to vote appropriation of funds for feasibility study. We had a retired NIMO engineer do a pre-feasibility study that gave us a good indication we would save about 1/3 cost on our electricity by doing our own generation. And unfortunately, the mayor took the money and asked the vendor that was hired to do the study to do something else with it. So we had that money pulled. Now we think the new mayor has actually taken that money again and done the wrong thing. Basically, they want to hire a private contractor to generate electricity for the government and the schools. Now, we want it for the whole community. It's an economic development thing because Solvay's out of room. That's the village next to Syracuse. And the industries are calling there all the time because they want the low electricity. Syracuse is an abandoned factory town. We got lots of industrial sites. People, we got a good workforce and everything, but the electricity's too high. That's a big reason why we don't have economic development up here. So, that's another reason to go with the public power. So that's where we're at, and we've been doing this now for 6 years in Syracuse, and we continue. Meanwhile, City of Auburn in 2004 voted to go municipal public power, and then the whole county, Cayuga around it, wanted to get in on it, so now they have a Cayuga County Power Authority. And instead of immediately investing and taking over the distribution system, the lines for electricity, they decided they would build generation and efficiency. So for example, they retrofitted Auburn City Hall with a ground source heat pump, geothermal heat pump. Y'all know what I'm talking about? They just use the heat in the ground from the sun to heat and cool the building with refrigeration heat pump, okay? So, and they're doing some biogas on one of their municipal waste places and things like that, and that they're developing it that way. I think the most interesting thing is up in the North Country, the Alliance for Municipal Power, 23 towns in Jefferson and those counties up there in the heart of that congressional district where the Tea Party ran the Republican out of the race, in that special election. Well, those very conservative folks up there said this makes sense. After NIMO, they went through the ice storm and then the rate shock. So they now have got from the state legislature, and it was signed by Governor Patterson, the right to set up a North Country Power Authority. And they are building generation capacity and taking over the distribution line in 23 towns up in the North Country of New York State. And then the Albany County Legislature has a resolution to begin studying this. I know Buffalo has looked at it. So this is kind of happening below the radar, but there is a movement out there and we're in touch with each other. Now, we have a crisis with fracking. I mean, it could be in a few months they'll be issuing permits. But as I said, I think this is one piece of our toolkit. It takes longer to build a public power. You got to build a public power system. You got to build public support. You got to link it to other issues like global warming. That's a big one we find in Syracuse. I think a lot of people are concerned about that. By the way, I did a little calculation of what the industry says, how much gas is in the Marcellus Shale they could extract, and it actually equals the carbon budget for the United States if you did a global carbon budget to keep us below 350 parts per million. You know, James Hansen and those folks. So basically, you know, they're selling this as the clean fuel, and actually, if we just burn the Marcellus gas, we'd use up our whole carbon budget the United States has, just from the Marcellus gas, not to mention all the oil and coal we're burning. So that's just an aside. I think we need to link our issue to the global warming folks, too. You got to deal with the economic feasibility and the legality, and then convince your political officials. So it's a political struggle. But I think the other side of it, as I said at the beginning, sometimes the best defense is a good offense. And they're trying to sell us natural gas as a clean alternative, you know, cleaner burning than coal and all that. And you all know the Cornell studies about the life cycle, and it's probably as much carbon for the amount of energy produced. We got that argument. And I just mentioned the total volume of Marcellus Shale. But people say, well, what's your alternative? Well, with public power, we can say, here's how we can implement it, right in our own communities. I think the remarks before about going to the town level is really important, and that can spark a statewide movement. I'll give you an example. One of the things I was involved with was the anti-nuclear movement and starting the Clamshell Alliance in New Hampshire. And, you know, we were picketing the banks investing in it, and we had a thing called the People's Energy Project of the Granite State Alliance. And, you know, the last resort was civil disobedience. And those of you older probably heard of the Clamshell Alliance, and we did occupations in '76 and then a huge one in '77, 1,414 people arrested, 1,200 of us locked up in National Guard armories for 10 days. It put the anti-nuclear movement on the map. The direct action got attention, but I'll tell you what won over the people in New Hampshire. Another conservative group like North Country in New Hampshire, Manchester Union Leader, you know, rock rib Republicans up there. And the Clamshell people were the hippies, you know, they were the tree huggers, you know. So when we started, the public opinion poll said 7% were anti-nuke. But what we did is in '78, after that big occupation, we went to town meeting on the seacoast and said, look, if this construction, maybe it was '77, is going to draw down the water, your wells. And we showed it and we proved it to folks, and so they voted to not allow the company to drill, you know, wells for water to do the construction because there are enormous amounts of concrete and whatnot. And then we said, wow, that was good. We got about 25 towns on the seacoast. So the next year, construction works in progress was the issue. That's where they get paid for the nuke before it even, we know it works. It actually gets through, back then you had a construction permit, then an operating permit. So they might build it and we'd have paid for it and then we'd never get any electricity. So we took that to these, you know, fiscally tight Republicans and they said, hell no. And there's about 350 towns, and my mouth drooled when I heard Adrian say 1,600 towns in New York. Now the difference in New Hampshire was you got town meeting. You know, you have everybody get together and they vote on the budget and any resolutions you bring up. 15 people in New Hampshire sign a petition and it's automatically on the agenda for town meeting. You know, and if it takes more than one day, they'll just go through the agenda items. So we took it to town meeting and the hippies convinced the Republicans to vote against QUIP, Construction Works in Progress, in about 275 of the 350 towns. We couldn't cover every town, but we got a lot of them. And the next year, the Democrat that was elected, Hugh Gallen, supported legislation and we stopped QUIP, which really hurt the financing of Seabrook. But that's an example where, you know, different tactics played off each other. The direct action got attention, people were talking about it, and then we took it to town meeting and people got down to the real nuts and bolts of how costly this nuke was. And the public opinion went from 7% opposed to 70% opposed in 2 years. So that's what can happen. And so public power is something that whatever level of fracking they get, I think carve-outs are a possibility. I've heard they're going to, the Skaneateles, Syracuse Lake, and the New York Catskill area, because there's, you know, opposition there from politicians in those communities and their cities may be exempted, but then they'll start drilling and, you know, where you've got more conflict between landowners and people that oppose it. So I think that, well, I lost my point. I got 5 minutes left. I want to get to questions and answers. Well, anyway, the last thing I'll say is if you want more, I was talking about public power and how it fits into the whole strategy. So if we have different levels of fracking, this is going to be an ongoing struggle even if they start permitting. And I think public power gives a way to say, we want the power to determine our own energy future, and we want it to be green. And so I think this is something to consider when you think about how you're going to organize in your communities. And I wouldn't have this substitute for any immediate stuff you're doing to push for a ban, but I think it's part of the overall picture. And if you want more information on public power, there's an American Public Power Association. Just Google these, American Public Power Association. If you want to see what they did up in the North Country, Google Alliance for Municipal Power. You may come up with North Country Power Authority or whatever they finally named it. We have a group in Central New York called the Central New York Public Power Coalition. And people keep asking about this T-shirt. This is a book. Harvey Wasserman, a guy from the Clamshell Alliance I've known a long time, has a book out called Solartopia. It's kind of a looking backward novel about how we went green from about now to about 30 years from now. And it's worth reading. I think it's a real inspiration. So with that, I think we got somewhere between 2 and 5 minutes. 4 minutes left. So any questions? I'm going to repeat the information at the end. American Public Power Association. That is the association of these 2,000 public power authorities, and their website has got volumes of stuff. You know, you can start with the basics. What is public power? Question and answers about public power. And, you know, once you get a campaign going, they'll send up experts to help you, you know, meet with your elected officials, hook you up with people that can do feasibility studies, legal questions, and all that. Alliance for Municipal Power is the group in the North Country, which is morphed into a power authority. I've been calling it the North Country Power Authority, which is, I think, what it was called, but I heard another name the other day. Central New York Public Power Coalition, that's our group in Syracuse. And in the book Solartopia, just Google that and you'll get to the website. Or it's probably on Amazon too.
This is just a question in regards to comments that I've been hearing all morning about DEC possibly issuing permits soon. And this makes me go crazy. What can we do to stop DEC from issuing permits?
Well, I think we need a combination of tactics. I think we got to support the ban bill. People want to do civil disobedience. I think that helps get attention, mass demonstrations, and the positive alternatives, which I think you can put into a public power campaign. I think we really got to attack. I mean, we got to attack on all fronts. And I think later in the conference we're going to talk about that. So I'm just going to leave it at that rather than try to speak for the whole conference on that question. Yeah.
Quick question. Hi. Do any of these municipalities in the American Public Power Association own natural gas drilling operations?
Not that I'm aware of. They may. You know, Tennessee Valley Authority's finishing up some nukes now that have been delayed since the 70s. That's a case where, and we have this true with New York Power Authority, it's a bureaucratic, you know, state bureaucracy. I mean, the head of NYPA is usually a political appointee that the governor makes, and some of them really don't know what they're doing. Some of them are pretty good. We had S. David Freeman, who was very good. Mario Cuomo appointed him, but the next guy that Pataki appointed was like a retired state senator. So they really had to keep the guy who had been there before underneath him just to keep the system, the agency running. But because it wasn't democratic, it's not very accountable. That's the problem with Tennessee TVA. TVA is federal, it's not state. But it's public. That's what I'm saying.
Could you say something about green jobs in relation to all of this? Because the biggest thing that we're getting beaten over the head with, I think, in terms of dealing with a lot of legislators and media as well, is the offers that these energy monopolies are making to employ all these people in upstate New York.
Yeah, I didn't bring statistics with me, but the jobs you're going to get from hydrofracking, a lot of these guys they go with the rigs all over the country. And then the spill-off jobs is basically serving those guys. Meanwhile, you're hurting other people. So the net, there's a woman named Janet Barth, I believe her name is, has done an economic study. People should look at that. You know, Google her name with, you know, hydrofracking or something like that and find that, because she's done a pretty extensive study on that. As far as green jobs, off the top of my head, there's an economist named Robert Pollin, P-O-L-L-I-N, and he's with a group out of UMass Amherst, Perry, Political Economy Research Institute, I think, and they have done studies of how much public investment will create X number of green jobs, and they've broken it down by industries. So you can dig into that and get some comparisons. I think the BAR study, I haven't read it in a while, but it really debunked what the industry was claiming. So I think that's where you can go to get information on that question.